Hello, everybody. Welcome to this webinar brought to you by Kenanga Investment Bank in collaboration with Rakuten Trade and also Bursa Malaysia. Today, our webinar title is Telco Sector Outlook, Game-Changing Regulatory Changes in the Telco Sector. My name is Shen Chu. I'm the moderator for this session. Now, as usual, before we begin, disclaimer, whatever is shared in this session is only for educational purpose. So in no way that we give any recommendation for you to buy or sell any listed securities that we mentioned here. If you decide to make any investment decisions, you're 100% responsible for all your investment risks. So today, we're going to delve deeper into the telecommunication sector. Now, our country now is transitioning from a single wholesale network for the 5G to the dual wholesale network. And of course, we expect an upheaval of the status quo. So today, we're going to explore what are the possible outcomes and scenario for this industry as we transition into the dual wholesale network for the 5G. Today, we are very honored to have invited the Senior Equity Analyst of the Kenanga Investment Bank, Ms. Kylie Chan, to share with us about game-changing regulatory changes in the telco sector. So good evening, Kylie. How are you today?
Oh, good evening, Shane. Hi. Yeah, I'm good. And yeah, thanks for the intro.
All right, cool. So I'll just hand over the session to you.
Okay, all right. Okay, so good evening, everyone. My name is Kylie, and I cover the telcos and media sector, as Shane mentioned. So thanks for tuning in. Tonight, we will discuss on the telecommunications sector, where we will touch on various topics. So Shane, if you could show the first slide. Right. So this is our table of contents. So we will touch on various topics, including regulatory changes in the mobile segment. And after that, we will progress to the outlook for both mobile and fixed players. And finally, we will zoom in on each telco stock under our coverage. So next slide. Okay, so in particular, we will spend more time to focus on implementation of the dual wholesale network in Malaysia, also known as DWN, and this will happen anytime soon. So do expect an announcement on this in the coming months. I'm sure the key question lingering on your minds would be, what is the dual wholesale network and what is its impact to telco companies? So to provide some historical context, we rewind to the early days before 5G first emerged. Before 2022, each private telco rolled out their own 2G, 3G, and 4G networks using their own CapEx. However, in 2021, the previous government introduced the concept of a single wholesale network, also known as SWN. So under the SWN model in Malaysia, there is only one single 5G network built and maintained by a government entity known as Digital National Berhad, or DNB. So if private telcos wish to offer 5G services to customers, they need to purchase wholesale capacity from DNB. Whilst there were initial plans to sell up to a 70% stake in DNB to 6 other telco operators, this ultimately did not materialize as Maxis and U-Mobile opted out. So therefore, the government maintained its 100% stake in DNB and proceeded to roll out Malaysia's first 5G network. Fast forward to today, as at the end of September, DNB has reached 70% 5G population coverage versus its target of 80% by year end. So to recap, this SWN model attracted a lot of controversy, such as concerns that it may not be cost efficient and that monopoly is detrimental to commercial interests and competition. So in May this year, the new government announced a dual wholesale network to replace the single wholesale network. And to kickstart the transition from SWN to DWN, 2 entities will be established, namely entities A and B. Entity A will own DNB, whilst Entity B will build and own the new second 5G network, whilst Entity A will resume DNB's operations and network rollout. B will start from scratch. However, B has a good 2 years to reach 80% population coverage, or COPA. So under the DWN framework, each entity will be led by a consortium of private telcos. To recap, the government initially planned to dispose 100% stake in DNB to the private telcos. However, recently the government said it has not made a final decision. The government also revealed that the telco players, including CelcomDigi, Maxis, TM, U-Mobile, and YTL Communications, will finalize their shareholdings in DNB soon. At the same time, we expect the government to review the actual equity stakes to be owned by each telco in entities A and B. Therefore, we expect an announcement anytime soon by the government. In fact, a major telco indicated that negotiations have reached the tail end. So hopefully the government will also unveil key financial and operational information on DWN's framework. So when all this happens, it will finally remove regulatory uncertainty that has been clouding the sector. Moving on, next slide. We come to the question of what is the likely outcome. So there are many scenarios that could emerge. However, we refrain from speculating who will end up in entity A or B. This is because the situation remains fluid and we don't have access to ongoing negotiations. However, we highlight some of our views that we hope viewers can arrive at your own conclusions. So firstly, the government aspires for healthy wholesale competition. This will result in enhanced 5G coverage and service quality. Therefore, we anticipate entity A and B will each be spearheaded by a single major telco. And this will be in consortium with other smaller players. And secondly, in order to create fair competition between both entities, the operating landscape needs to be level. So therefore, the total mobile subscriber base for both entities would need to be largely comparable. And for example, CelcomDigi or CDB has total mobile subscriber base of 20 million, whilst Maxis only has 12 million. So it makes mathematical sense that Maxis pairs up with other smaller players to form a consortium that can largely match CDB in terms of subscriber base. So thirdly, on the same note of fair competition, we believe that each entity will own equal blocks of 5G spectrum. And this is possible if we divide DNB spectrum into 2 equal parts. And lastly, we believe that the government will put in place an exit mechanism for entity B consortium members. And this will enable them to surrender their stakes in DNB to form entity B. And following this, entity A's shareholders may take over the surrendered stakes, and DNB will change its name to entity A. I'm done with this slide, so next one. Okay, so we believe that investors are also curious to know which is the better one. Is it entity A or B? Again, at this juncture, we have very limited information, so we can't reach a conclusive judgment on this. However, we outline a few key areas to look out for when the government makes an announcement. One of the key areas to note is the cost of acquisition for each entity. Key questions on this include, what is the mode of payment? Will it be cash or in other equivalent forms? Another focus area is entity A's financial position. We need to know key information such as, for example, question 1, is DNB currently profitable? And will it remain profitable in the years to come? Question 2, how much debt will entity A take over from DNB? And what is the average interest rate? So investors also need to know how entity A can remain profitable after Network 2 launches. Recall that DNB imposed a target capacity payment of 360 million ringgit per annum on Maxis and 288 million for other access seekers under a 10-year agreement. So we believe that during the first 2 years, entity B will continue to purchase wholesale capacity from entity A. Therefore, it may offer 5G services to customers while building their new network concurrently. However, 2 years later, after B's network is finally ready for launch, its pricing arrangement with A will likely be revised or terminated. So it would be unfair for entity A, as its 10-year agreement is now cut short into a few years. So most likely, entity A is enabled to recoup investments used to roll out the first network. And on top of that, recall that access prices for wholesale 5G is determined based on the long-run incremental cost model. So this means that DNB is entitled to earn a reasonable profit margin on top of cost recovery. So when DWN is implemented, we do not discount the possibility that entity B may need to provide some form of compensation to A. Okay, so moving on to the next question. The next slide. What is the potential impact to telcos? So there is this blue sky scenario where both entities, their operations have normalized, and we show this scenario on the slide. And this applies to entity A immediately, but for entity B, these benefits only apply after it has completed the rollout of Network 2. The ideal situation is that associate contribution of the entities more than offset expenses from, firstly, wholesale network payments, and secondly, interest costs on the cash outlay to acquire a stake in either entity. Hence, this will result in several benefits for the telco. Firstly, the telco will have a leaner balance sheet as it does not consolidate debt from the entities. And secondly, there will be a boost to earnings from both monetization of 5G and also associate contribution from the entities. Lastly, there will also be an absence of profit drag from these items. Number one, amortization of the 5G spectrum fees. Number two, depreciation of the 5G networks. And lastly, interest costs from the entity's debt. So when all these benefits are realized, this implies enhanced capacity for the telcos to leverage up and also afford higher dividends. So next. Now we explore what are the pros and cons of ownership in each entity. As in real life, there are always two sides to a coin, and so we believe there is no clear winner when it comes to choosing between A or B. Assuming there is no major cost to acquire a stake in either entity, there are pros and cons to each. And so we'll start off with entity B. We believe its major advantage lies in better control over the costs and timing of its network rollout. This is because B will have a free hand when it selects its technology provider, suppliers, and vendors. So therefore, this results in a better cost structure for B that enables it to derive higher asset returns. So in addition, B may also optimize its new network to integrate with its existing network of towers and infrastructure. So this translates to greater network cost synergies and service quality. However, on the flip side, for the cons, B needs to allocate substantial resources, especially manpower and fundraising, in order to roll out a new network. And as we mentioned earlier, it is possible that B may need to provide financial compensation to A to reimburse A for legacy costs that were incurred when they rolled out the first network. So in turn, this may lead to cash drag for B and hence impede its capacity to pay dividends. And so we're done with B. Next, we move to entity A, on the advantages and disadvantages. And the key advantage for A is immediate cash flow accretion from wholesale payments on Network 1. So in theory, this will boost A's cash holdings and allow it to pay higher dividends. On the other hand, a major disadvantage for A is that it will inherit Network 1 with its legacy cost structure and design. So if DNB's cost structure is high or inefficient, A is unable to offer competitive wholesale rates. And so if you recall, regulated tariffs offered by B cannot exceed that of A. Hence, if B is more efficient, it may offer lower rates and snag wholesale market share from A. So moving on. So we have reached the conclusion of our section on regulatory changes. And to cap it off, we believe that investors are generally upbeat on DWN. This is because it is an improvement over the SWN model where there was government intervention. And moreover, investors are definitely prefer that network rollout for 5G is liberalized and that DNB's monopoly is dismantled. However, the devil is in the details, and investors will definitely zoom in on all the areas we highlighted earlier. If we can safely conclude that earnings and dividends for telcos remain intact, we will likely maintain our outperform calls on the mobile players. But in the meantime, we are cautiously optimistic pending the government's official announcement. Okay, next. Okay, now that we have completed our section on regulatory changes, we now move into the next section, which is the outlook for the mobile and fixed segments. So we start off with the mobile segment, and we will touch on its outlook in relation to 5G. So as we all know, 5G is the key buzzword in the telco space right now. So will it live up to expectations as a key earnings driver? We beg to differ, as we believe it is still early days for now. However, let's zoom in on the potential of 5G first, and which is shown in the slide. And so we start with the relationship of telco companies with 5G. So telcos are an enabler of advanced technologies via 5G infrastructure. Latest equipment, devices, and solutions require high-speed 5G networks. This is to transmit large amounts of data at ultra-low latency. So modern devices and machinery that run advanced AI, Internet of Things, and so forth, they are enabled to function effectively on 4G. So that's the introduction on 5G. Now we move on to the applications of 5G technology for businesses or enterprise. As you can see from this table, there are many diverse uses for 5G in industries and enterprises. They include a precise automation, long-distance remote surveillance, real-time high-definition broadcasting, analysis of vast amounts of data on cloud AI, and so forth. So these applications transform businesses and enable them to scale up, boost efficiency, and achieve innovation. And whereas for a recent use case is implementation of an AI autonomous inventory system at DHL's Integrated Logistics Center in Shah Alam. And this is a system that combines robots and drones equipped with high-resolution cameras. So according to DHL, efficiency is boosted by 20-fold and precision is enhanced after installing the system. All right, so we move on to consumers. And in the case of consumers, 5G applications at this juncture include metaverse interactions, high-speed streaming for gaming, virtual reality, autonomous driving, so forth. However, we believe it is still early days, so consumer applications will expand more as hardware, software, and content developers harness 5G capabilities. So from this slide, you can see that industries and corporations are the early beneficiaries of 5G, so they will likely adopt 5G ahead of the traditional consumer. Next. So moving on to the next part, we discuss on the challenges that 5G faces, which I believe the key challenge that they face currently is the lack of awareness. So at this early stage, consumers and businesses are not aware of 5G's potential and benefits. And for those that do, some businesses are averse to transformation as they prefer systems and processes to remain status quo. And this is understandable as they need to fork out hefty technology investments and uproot their current systems. They will also need to be prepared to lay off some of their workforce as AI takes over. So on top of that, a major 5G technology provider revealed to us that some telco carriers are also reluctant to realign their marketing strategies. So now telcos need to focus on corporations instead of the traditional consumer when they try to sell 5G. So therefore, they need to train their sales teams to shift their focus and target large MNC multinational corporations instead. And meanwhile, on the consumer side, applications are still at the prototype developmental stage. This includes some autonomous cars, the metaverse, VR gaming, and so forth. And then at this juncture, these high-tech equipment are too expensive for an average consumer to afford. So therefore, the typical consumer does not feel compelled to upgrade to 5G, and this is unless our consumer applications are refined and become widely accessible. Next. Okay, now that we have addressed the potential and challenges of 5G, we come to the question of, is 5G a major re-rating catalyst for Malaysian telcos? We'll look at this chart on the bottom right to answer this question. So as you can see, traction in 5G adoption has been sluggish, and this is evident from the small 5G subscriber base of 1.4 million in Malaysia, and this drops in comparison with 43 million 4G subscribers that we have. So moreover, out of the 15% of CDB subscribers that signed up for 5G, merely 11% are active users. So according to OpenSignal, 5G availability in Malaysia was just 21% during the May to July period. And as such, the current 5G infrastructure does not appear adequate to accommodate more users and traffic. So therefore, this is even more reason for the deployment of Network 2 to boost 5G service quality and attract users. Therefore, to conclude this section and to answer our earlier question, we believe that 5G is not a major earnings driver for now. However, we do acknowledge the potential of 5G monetization over a longer time horizon. So when this happens, we will see 5G providing a boost to ARPUs and earnings. However, in the meantime, we need to wait for awareness capacity to ramp up. Okay, next. Okay, so we have reached the last leg of our presentation where we now zoom in on the fixed segment. Now that we're done with mobile and also regulatory changes. So we believe, for fixed players, we believe sentiment is improving, particularly for TM and Time.com. And this is because the repricing of our retail and wholesale services have finally been reviewed over the past few months. So to recap, all the fixed players, except for Time, have introduced new prices for their retail broadband packages. And in essence, the price cuts have turned out milder than expected. And furthermore, earlier concerns of a price war in the retail space have proven wrong. And lastly, repricing of TM's wholesale broadband services was also largely benign. So we believe that earnings headwinds for fixed players have largely dissipated. And for the next few slides, I will elaborate on these points in more detail. Okay, to illustrate my earlier point on retail prices, so we take TM's repricing of its unified broadband plans as an example. So this was reviewed last month. We use TM as an example because it is the dominant fixed player with a large base of 3 million customers. Maxis is only at a distant second with about 600,000 subscribers. For the home segment, you can see from the chart that prices were cut by 7 to 24%. However, this does not directly translate to ARPU and earnings erosion for Unify. And why is that? This is because at the same time, TM announced free upgrades for existing subscribers to the next higher speed plan. For example, this means that customers on the 30 Mbps package will automatically upgrade to 100 Mbps and so forth. And this is while they continue to enjoy the same monthly fees. So on top of that, TM also discontinued its entry-level 30 Mbps plan. What all this means is that TM's existing revenues from Unify home plans remain intact. It's because existing subscribers continue to pay the same monthly fees, but they receive higher speeds. And according to TM, the increase in cost to upgrade speeds for its customers is negligible. Now, take note that the bulk, or about 80% of TM subscribers were on the bottom two speed plans, which means the entry-level 30 and 100 Mbps plans. So therefore, we anticipate that new customers will now pay higher monthly ARPUs of 99 and 139 ringgit for 100 and 300 Mbps instead. Recall that previous entry-level plans were priced at 89 ringgit and 129 ringgit. Therefore, the so-called price cuts may potentially even uplift ARPUs for TM. On the flip side, some people might argue that there's a risk of Unify customers downtrading to lower speeds. For example, this applies to an existing subscriber who was previously paying 129 ringgit per month for 100 Mbps. So after this repricing, he is now automatically upgraded to 300 Mbps. However, moving forward, as his contract expires, he may potentially opt to downgrade and revert to 100 Mbps. And as a result, he pays lower charges of 99 ringgit instead of 129 ringgit per month. However, in our view, we believe there is low possibility of this customer downtrading. And this is because he would have enjoyed 3 times faster speeds before his contract expired. So he may be reluctant to downgrade as this would diminish his internet experience. Furthermore, this customer could afford to pay 129 ringgit in the first place. So I hope this illustration on retail broadband repricing is clear for everyone to understand. Next. So we're looking at the pricing plans, new price plans for Maxis and CDB. So the case is largely similar for Maxis, where it is continued its lowest 30 Mbps speed entry plan. It also upgraded speeds for existing subscribers. However, in the case of Celcom Digi, it was the only player that effected price cuts without free speed upgrades. But this will likely have an insignificant impact to CDB's earnings, given that it only has a smallish base of about 114,000 subscribers, which drops in comparison with TM and Maxis. So post-repricing, you can see from this table for entry-level 100 Mbps plans, all 3 major players are now on par with each other at about 99 ringgit per month. Meanwhile, for the next most popular plan of 300 Mbps, prices are also largely comparable between all players at about 129 to 139 ringgit per month. So all this quells earlier concerns of telco players engaging in a price war. And next. So now we move on to the fixed wholesale segment. And TM finally revealed its new wholesale prices in the end of July. This was after a lot of market speculation that prices will nosedive. The speculation stemmed from release of the government's new MSAP, mandatory standard on access pricing back in February. So to recap, prices offered by wholesale players may not exceed maximum tariffs prescribed by MSAP. In comparison to prevailing 2020 MSAP prices, reductions imposed by the new MSAP is very high at 51% across the board. So it was a relief that actual cuts in TM's wholesale prices only ranged 9% to 60%, and this appears to be much milder. And all this is based on TM's latest reference access offer, or RAW, for wholesale broadband tariffs. Next. So still on the same topic, as you can see on the table, from the table on the right-hand side, we estimate that new wholesale tariffs are now lower by 9 to 60%, as you mentioned earlier, in comparison to the TM's 2018 RAW. However, we believe that the 60% maximum savings will likely not benefit smaller players. And this is because they don't require such high bandwidths of at least 9 Tbps for their small subscriber base. And I may appear to repeat this many times, but recall that TM's Unify is almost like a monopoly in the fixed line market with 3 million subscribers, while Maxis is at a distant second with 600,000. So what all this means is that all this 60% savings will likely not accrue to the smaller players, to TM's competitors like Maxis and CDB. So all this will have a very muted impact on TM's wholesale revenues. So note that MSAP does not have recommendations for tiered pricing based on different bandwidths. It merely prescribes a very simple 51% cut across the board. So therefore, this means that TM was very clever in using the tiered approach, as you can see from the table on the left-hand side. Hence, this enables TM to implement price cuts that appear reasonable and not as steep as what was prescribed by MSAP. So at the same time, TM is not in violation of MSAP standards. So our overall view of mild wholesale repricing is reinforced by the fact that corresponding retail price cuts were also subdued as well. So moving forward, we understand that TM is finalizing negotiations with access seekers on the new round. And after this, we need to monitor the earnings impact of this repricing, which will take effect retrospectively from March. But overall, the clouds seem to have cleared for wholesale players like TM. Okay, so next slide. Okay, now we are finally done talking about the sector, and we now zoom in on our stock coverage. Basically, our top pick in the sector is CB for the reasons we outline here. Firstly, we believe that merger synergies will drive value creation of 8 billion ringgit in NPV over the next 5 years. Secondly, in spite of some integration and merger costs, we still expect a robust cash flow exceeding 6% in FY23 to 24. Hence, this implies more than ample capacity to pay steady dividends. And lastly, post the merger, we believe that CDB enjoys better economies of scale and pricing power, and this is due to its market leadership surpassing that of Maxis. Next slide. So here are the two other major telco stocks that we cover, and you can take a look at this slide for the key drivers and risks. And next slide. Okay, so on this slide, you can compare the valuations of the major telco stocks that we cover, and you can see here that in terms of forward EV/EBITDA, all of the telcos except for CDB are trading below their historical mean. So in particular, Axiata and Maxis are currently trading at one standard deviation below historical mean, and this implies that valuations are looking cheap and attractive. And although CDB trades at a slightly higher valuation of 10 times versus Maxis at 9.5 times, we still hold the view that it is more compelling based on the reasons we highlighted earlier. Okay, and next slide. Okay, we have finally reached the very last slide of this presentation. I think we're actually running ahead of time. So to sum it all up, we currently have an overweight recommendation on this sector due to attractive valuations and for the reasons outlined here. However, depending on the actual outcome on DWN, we are cautiously optimistic. So we are inclined to downgrade the sector anytime if the financial terms on DWN turn out unfavorable, as this will impact the telco's capacity to pay dividends. So this is all from me, and I hope you find this presentation informative and helpful. And so this ends my presentation, and I now pass the time back to Shane.
All right, thank you so much, Kylie, for sharing with us the outlook for the telco sector. So if you have any question to ask Kylie, you can type your question in the Q&A box, not the chat box here. Type in the Q&A box so we can address your questions accordingly. All right, the first question that I see on my screen is asked by James Edwin. How long more before 6G becomes available?
Oh, okay. Okay, great. Hi, James. So thanks for your question. So okay. So I attended this conference by CDB recently, and we were talking to the chief technology officer of Huawei, and he was also previously advisor to the chairman, and he did mention that 5G is still at its early days. So yeah, they're still testing 5.5G currently in Scandinavian countries, and so 5G has, although it's been first implemented in South Korea probably about 2 years ago, this is still relatively new technology. So in this Huawei's management's view, that 5G will probably last for at least the next 10 years. So in the meanwhile, we shall have to wait for 6G. If it does come probably about 10 years later, I think that would be a fair assumption.
All right, thank you so much, Kylie.
All right, thank you.
The next question on my screen is asked by King Shen. Now we have another telco player, OCK. So his question is, can you please explain how is OCK Group going to benefit from the government's Jendela 2 and the rollout of 5G in the country?
Oh, okay. Thanks for your question, Sing Yong. Right. So, yes, actually, we do cover OCK Group, but I didn't include it in my slides as it wasn't one of the major telcos. So, it does in fact benefit from Jendela 2, and yes, but Jendela 2 will be more on the rollout of 4G infrastructure in those gap areas to bridge the digital divide between suburban and rural, right? So I think the earlier question on how it would benefit, definitely more contracts, and they have been receiving quite significant contracts, but they don't announce that all the time. Right. So, but then I think recently they did announce a government contract, somewhat related to Jendela 2, but not a direct contract. So yes, they are the key beneficiary, and they have been enjoying Jendela 2 contracts for at least the past year. And moving forward, when the Network 2 rolls out under DWN, management also expects to secure a lot more jobs. And yeah, OCK would be a good proxy to write on that. However, I think the key, and we do have an outperform call on OCK. However, I think the key thing to look out for in OCK is actually earnings delivery. It would be great if the contract announcements actually translate to earnings accretion and more news flow and announcements. So we are still waiting for that to materialize more tangibly. So I hope that at least provides some color to your question.
All right, thank you so much, Kylie. Okay, the next question is by Wee Leng. The new regulations look like a lot of price cuts and discounts. Eventually, that will impact on the overall growth and earning in the overall sectors.
Okay. Thanks for that question, Mile. So, yeah, I think as I have illustrated earlier in the slides, we believe that competition seems to be rational. So, yeah, if you refer back to what I expressed earlier, for example, in the fixed segment for retail, the price cuts are very muted. In fact, we don't believe that it would result in ARPU erosion for the telco players, for the fixed players. And for example, what I illustrated earlier with TM, we think with them upgrading speeds, but at the same time discontinuing the entry-level package. And Maxis has also followed the same strategy as well. The only telco that actually cut price was CDB, but CDB doesn't have much of a subscriber base, doesn't have a substantial subscriber base to begin with, and so they're not actually a price leader, and the other two big players do not necessarily need to follow suit. And so I think pricing appears very rational, and there's no undercutting of each other in a fixed space. And I actually see the similar trends in the mobile segment as well. The only ARPU pressure that we see actually emanates from the prepaid segment, and that is because the government has actually the government is promoting increasingly asking telcos to lower their prices for prepaid, under the Madani economy framework. So we see pressure on the prepaid front, but so far, I don't know if you have experienced that yourself personally, but based on what we see from the data coming in from the telcos during their quarterly results, their ARPUs are actually quite stable, and not much pressure on that front for now. So hope that answers your question.
Thanks, Kelly.
Very welcome.
The next question is asked by Maslan. He remarked that we are only a small nation with small population, since the business case for 5G is still at an early stage, why can't we follow Singapore using a single wholesale network, which is more cost effective?
Okay, thanks, Masa, for your question. That's a very good question. Right. First of all, I think Singapore has a liberalized approach to implementation of network rollout. So therefore, I think Singapore followed Malaysia's model back during 4G, where they actually rolled out, implemented their own networks, and it was a free liberal commercial market. And so the reason the government implemented SWN was because the government was concerned that that the telcos would not roll out 5G infrastructure and Malaysia would fall behind the technological curve. And the rural areas and so forth would not receive 5G coverage, as it would be commercial driven instead of populist driven. So the SWN model was introduced by the government for that reason. And so I think there was a lot of opposition, as what we highlighted earlier in the slides, a lot of controversy. And so now we are transitioning to the DWN model. And I believe that, in my opinion, the best model is still the Singapore model, which is, and also the model that's widely practiced in countries worldwide, especially those in developing countries, where it's a liberal approach, demand-driven commercial rollout of 5G. But however, the government has decided to take this route of SWN, and so the previous government did so. So the new government introduced DWN instead as a counter, and I think the situation would improve with DWN, in my opinion. Although, of course, the best case would be what we see in the developed countries and Singapore as well. Okay, so I hope that answers your question to a large extent.
All right, thanks so much, Kelly. The next question is, do you have visibility on the cost of implementation of 5G per base station?
Okay, unfortunately, I don't have that number on how much it costs to build a 5G base station. However, what was revealed by the government during the implementation of SWN was that DNB would spend 16.5 billion to roll out 5G and achieve 80% population coverage. So I don't have that granular data, but I hope that the more macro numbers that I provided to you, the 16.5 billion over for 5G, and this would probably involve about 4,000 towers, and I hope that you can arrive at some conclusion based on these more macro numbers.
Okay. All right, thanks, Kelly. The next question is by Azizi Hadi. So when will 5G service providers start to activate their standalone core to enable most of the enterprise services?
Okay, so right, I think the slicing part, I think like for example, we hear of Petronas implementing private 5G networks in Malacca and in the Sungai Udang terminal, and I believe that would involve some spectrum slicing, and I'm not sure if the 5G service providers are able to do that because they're purchasing capacity on a wholesale basis from DNB, on DNB, so they actually don't own the spectrum. I'm not sure if they have the rights to do that. So, but however, to answer your question, I think we. At least from my conversations with the telco players, the implementation of all these private 5G networks are still at a very early stage, and demand is still not very visible at this juncture. So therefore, So therefore, I think they are taking their time to sort out the regulatory and also operational, trying to navigate that on the regulatory and operational front to enable that. Okay, so I hope that answers the question.
All right, thanks, Kelly. So if you were to pick only one telco company into our portfolio, and which telco company would you recommend for long-term investment? So that question is by Andrew.
Okay, thanks, Andrew, for that question. So a long-term investment. Okay, so I believe in the secular trend of data, with data being the enabler of AI, Internet of Things, data being the next. I mean, it's the current revolution. That the current data revolution is still ongoing, and now it has been propelled further by the advent of AI and also IoT, as we mentioned earlier. So, which telco stock falls under that category would be Time.com and also TM. And I think I would, in my opinion, I would, I don't cover Time.com, but I would pick TM for that reason, and because they have the balance sheet. They're FBM KCI component, strong balance sheet. I think they should be one of the best proxies to write the long-term secular data trends. So that would be my pick for that.
All right, TM lah, huh? So TM and Time.com, while you don't cover Time.com.
Yes.
All right. So Kylie, do you think there will be more consolidation in the telco sector?
Oh, okay. So I missed that. All right. So, okay. So we recently went through the consolidation of Celcom Digi. In my opinion, we have reached. I think we're quite optimistic for now. If we consolidate the three mobile players together, that would not be ideal because we wouldn't have competition. It would be a monopoly, and we all know that competition drives efficiencies and drives innovation, right? So I think we are good for now. I can't answer for the government, but in my view, I think if the government had to intervene, the government had always expressed the need for competition and to dismantle monopolies. However, in the fixed line space, we only have Time.com and TM. So again, it would be great not to have a monopoly in that space as well. So any consolidation would actually, I believe, would happen outside of the major telcos, with all the smaller players like YTL and YTL Communications with their Yes brand, or U-Mobile. I think consolidation of the smaller players in future might be very plausible, given that they would have economies of scale and they'll be able to thrive financially and actually provide some competition to the larger players. So I think if any, it would actually be the smaller players like U-Mobile and YTL Communications. Them collaborating would actually appear to be good for the industry as a whole. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing your perspective in this. So let's go back to the proposition of the entity A and entity B. So the entity B will have the advantage of using existing 4G infrastructure for upgrade to 5G, except for the legacy equipment that do not cater for 5G. So this potentially translates to huge cost saving over entity A, right?
Okay, thanks, CT, for the question. Right. So, okay. Okay, so to clarify, entity A uses the co-location model. So entity A's 5G equipment is actually installed on existing telco towers that carry 4G and 3G infra, right? But in spite of that, they did. Earlier press reports indicated that they spent a very hefty 14.5 to 16.5 billion to roll out 5G. So Entity B, yes, they do have the advantage of using their existing infrastructure, such as the base, the base stations, the base telecommunications towers. But I think with 5G, we would actually need to install new towers because based on my conversations with those contractors, those industry players, they feel 5G actually needs uh, due to the nature of the 5G spectrum, is a short, due to the properties of the spectrum, the coverage of 5G is small, so it actually needs higher deployment of towers. Whereas for 4G, the range is wider. And so when you try to install 5G equipment on 4G towers and expecting the same coverage, that is technically not possible. So in my opinion, if Entity B wants a very effective network, of course, they can derive some cost savings when they install on existing towers, but over the long run, if they wish to drive 5G adoption, they definitely need to increase their service quality by building more base stations. So and this applies to Entity A as well if they intend to stay competitive. So again, to answer your question, I don't think there's any advantage on that front. But in other ways, we definitely see Entity B having more advantages as what we have shown in our earlier slides. Okay.
I think CT has a follow-up comment that says that Entity B will have better integration and optimization between their existing 4G and 5G network, translating to better quality of service and improve power utilization for handsets. So currently heard complaints on handset short battery life and going hybrid 4G and 5G. What do you think?
Oh, yes. Okay. Thanks for this question. Yes, it's great information to hear as well. Yes, I have heard of complaints that short battery life when they transition between 4G and 5G towers, 4G and 5G technology. So yes, it's true that Entity B will have better integration and optimization, as what we have highlighted earlier in the slides. Right? So yes, because it's commercial driven network. There's more there's more autonomy for the telco players to optimize and integrate their network. So that is definitely true. And thanks for okay. I didn't catch the question earlier, but yeah, what the points that you have highlighted is definitely the case.
All right. Van have a follow-up question, which says that Entity B is likely to use cheap Huawei 5G equipment for a second network, thus giving the telco players the equipment price advantage. So how will Entity A compete given high cost structure of DNB and Entity A?
Oh, okay, that's a fantastic question. Yeah, it shows that you have indeed been paying attention to my slides. Okay, so yes, I know I have read the news flow where our Prime Minister indicated that there's a possibility that Entity B, the second network, might deploy Huawei 5G equipment. Okay, is it cheaper? Probably. Yeah, so yes, in comparison to Ericsson, I would assume so, given exchange rate. And so how will Entity A compete? So I think if you refer to my earlier slides, yes, I did highlight the possibility, this very high probability that Entity A's network might have a legacy high cost structure. So yeah, so on that front, we believe we do not discount the possibility, and we have heard industry rumors implicating that Entity B might need to compensate Entity A to allow both of them to operate on a level landscape due to, like as what you mentioned, legacy costs might be a drag for Entity A's network. And so these costs have been expensed. So moving forward, Entity B would ideally need to compensate if that is indeed the case. So I hope that answers the question.
All right. Thanks so much, Kylie. James have a follow-up question, which is the minister in charge has made so many calls regarding the telcos entering agreement, and yet the date still does not seem near. Why?
Oh, okay, yes. Again, a very good question. Yes, that is true. All right, there has been some industry rumors circulating that the delay is due to many factors, right? So we have so many players with different agendas. We have the government, right, which wants to drive the populist policies. We have the telcos that are commercially driven, and so therefore all these conflicting interests are coming together, and also the fact that the Ministry of Finance is involved as well, given their full ownership of DNB. So all of them has all of them have their concerns, and all of them have their agenda. So and so when they come together, I hope that explains why there's a delay. I mean, I can't review. I can't. Okay, I don't have access to the negotiations, but I have heard rumors here and there. So I have heard that there are some parties, especially the non-mobile players, that have been holding up negotiations because they're trying to decide to which entity to join, which consortium to join. So will they be in the entity A camp, or will they be in the entity B camp? And they're trying to pull their weight. And so this is just a very crowded space. Even the smaller players are making their voices heard. So that should largely explain the delay, and which we expect will be resolved soon, according to the telco players that are involved. They do indicate that it would be anytime, and then the final stages of negotiation. But then again, I've heard that from many months ago. So we still need to wait and see, unfortunately.
Yeah, Yam have a follow-up question that says, if suddenly we change minister from the other side, how will this plan go? Will they scrap all the previous government idea and start all over again?
Okay. Yes. Okay. So I have covered the power. Previously I've covered the power and utilities sector, and this happened all the time. Back when I covered power and utilities, and it was also very regulatory driven. The ministry. Whenever there's a change of ministry, and therefore trucks, plans get derailed, we start from scratch again, and the process restarts. So so that would probably be the case. However, MCMC being an independent body, and we expect the longer term plans to remain intact. However, the process will be delayed. So I hope that answers the question.
Yep. So hope we don't have to wait until 2030 to get 5G. Okay.
Yeah, good quality 5G. We have 5G now. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Raj Kumar has this question. What have you seen so far in terms of a take-up rate of 5G services by enterprise customers for use cases such as IoT devices, drones, telemedicine, etc.? Are there any guidance from the telco players regarding demand for these services moving forward?
Okay, again, a very good question. Yes, I have posed these questions to the telcos, and they say demand is pretty sluggish at this moment. And I think I've also highlighted earlier in the slides, we don't have very big multinational corporations that have a lot of money to spend to upgrade their systems, to invest in technology and automation in AI, to hire consultants and IT specialists to come implement groundbreaking technology that uses 5G. So unfortunately, these are still early days, and even in other developed countries, they still struggle with demand for 5G. These developed countries, they have all these MNCs that we talked about earlier that have the capacity to spend, that have the drive to implement change and to be the leader in technology. So demand is up for now, but I think it's really good that that okay, I attended a conference a few weeks ago organized by CDB. And for example, this conference was exclusively for business leaders, for CEOs, for bosses of corporations that, could potentially implement 5G for their factories or for their companies, right? So we are making steps to it, achieving that, to it promoting the awareness of 5G's potential, and towards encouraging corporations to implement changes so that they may adopt 5G. So to answer your question, sluggish for now.
I see. The next question is by CT. Use cases of 5G may diminish with the evolution of Wi-Fi other than wide area coverage and mobility. So can huge spending in 5G infrastructure be monetized?
All right. So okay, so yes, I have also explored this with my my telco counterparts discussion. So yeah, so we're talking about Wi-Fi and wide area networks, probably. I think you're referring to that. And so this fixed technology, unfortunately, according to what the telco experts believe, is that fixed technology is quite limited in allowing the application of those high technology applications, as what we have mentioned earlier in the slides. We still need 5G and mobility because of its mobility properties, right? So like for example, remote surveillance over in rural areas, in remote areas, we can achieve that via 5G, whereas a wide area network, we can't do that. And for example, autonomous driving as well, we still need 5G because we need that immediate reaction. Yeah, these are mission critical applications like autonomous driving, right? So we need that high speed, low latency, real time response. We still need mobile technology to implement the applications that we highlighted earlier. But yes, to answer your question, to a large extent, especially if we are staying at home or we're staying mobile in our offices, for most consumer applications that are not very high tech, we are okay to use fixed technology. I hope that's relevant to your question.
All right, thank you so much, Kylie, for addressing all the questions on our panel today. I guess that there are no more questions right now, so I think we really stretched Kylie to the limit. Oh wait, there's one more question.
No, more than happy. I'm glad for all the questions.
Yeah, we have a very engaging Q&A session today, which some of them are really good questions. All right, the next question is by Raj Kumar. There is a high amount of CapEx spent across both Entity A and Entity B to implement 5G services without significant increases in prices. So additionally, demand for additional services such as connectivity for IoT, drones, and general industrial 4.0 is also lacking in Malaysia. So in this case, while 5G is required as part of the natural tech improvement, is this really positive development for telco service providers, or you would downgrade the sector?
Oh, okay. That's fantastic. The amount of information there. Okay, yes. All right. Yes, we do. I get your point. I see your perspective. We're spending so much, and demand is still low, and again, the government. So hence the government intervention, right? The government wants to intervene to accelerate 5G rollout. So the government does commit to trying to increase demand as well. So apparently our government is working very hard to promote Malaysia as an investment destination, right, for FDI. And so hopefully this FDI will adopt 5G. And yeah, and understandably so, since the government is involved in 5G deployment via their involvement in DNB, and now they're also trying to regulate rollout of the second network via NTTP. So okay, so the way the Malaysian telco sector works is how Malaysian investors view telcos ultimately boils down to dividends, and dividends. As long as you have the capacity to pay dividends, investors are more than happy to buy and hold your stock for the long term. And these investors are long term anyway. Most of the major telcos are being held by GLICs and by institutions who seek yield and stability, right? So would I downgrade the sector? What you highlighted is true, especially now since it's early days, we're still in the gestational period, right? So I would not be, so to answer your question, I would not I would not act in impulse to downgrade the sector. I would not act so quickly to downgrade the sector unless I see that dividends and cash flows are affected by investments in 5G, right? So for now, the telcos, the balance sheets are still looking very fine, right? Like for example, right. So I as long as their capacity to pay dividends is not disrupted by their investments in 5G, I would still be optimistic on the sector. So it really depends on how the DWN framework is implemented. So if the investments, if it's going to be irrational, too much capex spent on 5G, then that would hinder the capacity to pay dividends. And yeah, then unfortunately, and I would not hesitate to downgrade the sector, right? So especially if the financial terms are very unfavorable, then there is no choice but to downgrade the sector, right? But yes, ideally the investments in 5G should be more paced to cope with demand and adoption. So yeah, we need to continue monitoring the sector. If that would indeed be the case, then maintain outperform. If not, then yes, it will be a downgrade.
Right. Thank you so much, Kylie. As you said, you're cautiously optimistic of the sector while we wait for more clarity from government about the dual wholesale network.
Yes.
When you mentioned about dividend, I just remember a telco company, Nexus, when they redo the IPO, they even borrowed to pay dividend. That's what I remember.
Yes, exactly right. So yeah, and yeah, exactly. So the telcos, right? Yeah. So actually, people just want it's just a dividend play. I don't really care if from an investor's perspective, I don't really. I'm not that concerned if you have to invest in 5G as long as your dividends are stable. So. So let's see if they can indeed execute that. But if you're a bit concerned about that, then yeah, then you should go for fixed players.
All right. Thank you so much, Kylie, for doing this Q&A session. It was a very engaging Q&A. So thank you so much, everybody, for tuning until the end of this session. So ladies and gentlemen, so we have just heard from the senior equity analyst from Kenanga Research, Miss Kylie Chan.
All right, thank you very much. Thanks for all the questions and thanks for an engaging audience. And I hope you all have a good evening.
All right, thanks, Kylie. And for those of you who haven't opened a share trading account with Kenanga, you may fill out an online account opening form. I will pass it to you in a short while in the chat group. If you haven't joined Kenanga Trade to Win Telegram channel, I will also send you the link here for you to get trade ideas in this Telegram channel. If you haven't downloaded the latest Kentrade 2.0 mobile app, you can go to Apple App Store or Google Play to download them. In Kentrade 2.0, you have new features and improved user interface that can help you to execute your trades. All right. So last but not least, this is the last segment that Kenanga is doing this webinar with in collaboration with Wellford. So hope that you have enjoyed the session so far and gained a lot of insight through all these webinars that we have organized for Kenanga. So if you want to stay connected with me, you can go to Facebook or Instagram or to email me and if I exchange through 7, that's how we can stay connected. So with that, I want to thank all of you for being a wonderful audience in this telco webinar outlook. Hope that you have gained insights into the telco industry and learned so much better about telco right now. So while we wait for more development from government, so Kenanga is cautiously optimistic of this sector. So with that, thank everybody, and we'll see you in our next webinar. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody. Goodbye.
Thanks, Kylie.
Thanks, Jane. Oh, hi, Shane.